Hi there, scholars. Today we're going to be doing some subtraction with renaming. So we're going to continue our study of subtracting mixed numbers, but we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to do if we need to rename those numbers. So let's take a look at this example. It says, to practice for a race, Kara is running 2.5 miles. When she reaches the end of her street, she knows that she has already run 1 5/6 miles. How many miles does Kara have left to run? So we want to know how many miles Kara has left to run. Well, we know that Kara is running 2.5 miles, and we know that when she reaches the end of her street, she has already run 1 5/6 miles. And so to figure out how many she has left, we're going to need to subtract. And so since we have different denominators, our first step is to find a common denominator and make equivalent fractions. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So we have, if you'll turn to the next page, if you'll turn to the back of that page, we're going to go ahead and set up our problem. So we have 2.5 minus 1 5/6. And so just like we've done before, we're going to bring our whole numbers over. And then we have to find a common denominator for 2 and 6. So if I make a list of the multiples for 2 and 6, we have 2, 4, 6, and then for 6, clearly 6. So we know that 6 is a common multiple for 2 and 6. So our common denominator, our least common denominator, is 6. Okay, so that means that this is going to stay the same. This is going to stay 1 5/6. And up here, to get from 2 to 6, I have to do times 3 and times 3, which is 1 whole. 1 times 3 is 3. And then I subtract. So 3 minus 5. Well, I realize that I'm not going to be able to do that without regrouping. So if you look at step number 2, it says to rename our 2 3/6, so our top whole number, as a mixed number with a fraction greater than 1. That sounds a little bit confusing. So let me explain what we're going to do. Basically, we're going to come over here and take 1 whole from this 2, which leaves it with 1, and turn that into that 1 whole that I just took from this 2 into a fraction. Now the fraction that I'm going to use it depends on the denominator here. So since my denominator is 6, I'm going to make my 1 whole that I just took from over here, and I'm going to put it right here in the form of 6, 6, because we know 6, 6 is 1 whole. The reason I look at the denominator is I want my denominators to be the same when I add. It makes my life a little easier. So I'm going to bring over my 1 whole that I had. I'm going to add my numerators. 3 plus 6 is 9. And 9/6. Now, this is the same thing as my 2 3/6, because it's just in a different form. Because if I change 9/6, then I would have 1 3/6 that I would add to this, which would be 2 3/6. It's the same thing, it's just it looks different, so that now I can subtract. So I bring my 1 5/6 over. It stays completely the same. I'm not doing anything with that. And I subtract. Now I can subtract. 9 minus 5 is 4. sixth. And 1 minus 1 is 0. So let's go back at and look at our steps. So we're going to find the difference of the fractions, which we just did. And then we're also going to find the difference of the whole numbers, which we did when we subtracted 1 minus 1, and we had 0. And then the last step is we want to simplify if needed. Always, always simplify your answers if you can. So let's go back and finish this out. We've found the common denominator and made equivalent fractions. We renamed that top number, 2 and 3/6, as a mixed number with a fraction greater than 1. That was our 9/6, 1 and 9/6. Then we found the difference of the fractions. That was 4/6. And then we found the difference of the whole numbers, which was 0. And now we need to go back and look and see if we can simplify that. So I asked myself, is there a factor that 4 and 6 have in common? And the answer would be yes. They have 2 in common. So I'm going to divide my numerator and denominator by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Then I asked myself, can this be simplified any further? Is there a factor that 2 and 3 have in common? And the only one they have in common is 1. So I know that my answer is now in simplest form. So if we go back, we now know that Kara has 2/3 of a mile left to run. Okay, let's do a couple other examples so you are familiar with how to do this. Okay, my next example is going to be 1 3/4 minus 7/8. Again, I have two different denominators, so I'm going to have to find a common denominator. So I bring my whole number over, no whole number here. And I have to come up with a common denominator for 4 and 8. If I were to list the multiples for 4 and 8, I would know that 8 is a common multiple for both 4 and 8. Therefore, I can use 8 as my common denominator. To get from 4 to 8, I'm going to multiply times 2, and that means that I have to multiply 3 times 2 to get 6. And so then I subtract 6 minus 7. Well, you can see that I'm not going to be able to do that without regrouping. So if I take this whole and I change it into a fraction, and remember my fraction as a whole has to have the same numerator and denominator, and I always want to look at my denominator to determine what that's going to be. So in this case, it's going to be 8. So I do 8/8 here. And so now I add my numerators together to get 14/8. I bring my 7/8 over. Nothing happened with that. And then I'm able to subtract. 14/8 is the same as 1 6/8. I'm just putting it in a form that I can subtract with. 14 minus 7 is 7. My denominator is 8. And then I ask myself, is there any factor, can this be simplified? Are there any factors that 7 and 8 have in common? The only factor they have in common is 1. Therefore, 7/8 is in simplest form. Okay, let's do one more before we finish today. So I have 12 1/9 minus 7 1/3. Okay. So again, my denominators are not the same. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is find a common denominator. Bring my whole numbers over. If I were to list the multiples for 9 and 3, I would see that they have 9 in common. So that means that my top fraction does not change. And down here, to get from 3 to 9, I'm going to do times 3. 1 times 3 is 3. 1 minus 3, I'm unable to do that as it is, so I'm going to have to regroup. So I'm going to take 1 from my 12, makes it 11. That 1 whole comes right over here in the form of a fraction. My denominator's 9, so I make it 9 ninths. So I bring my whole number over, which is now 11. 1 plus 9 is 10 ninths. 7 and 3 ninths comes straight over. 10 minus 3 is 7 ninths. And 11 minus 7 is 4. I ask myself if this can be simplified. Is there any factor that 7 and 9 share? The only factor they share is 1. Therefore, it's already in simplest form. So my answer is 4 and 7 ninths. Make sure you keep these notes with you to bring to class tomorrow, and we'll continue working on some subtraction with renaming. Have a good day.